Good evening, good morning, wherever you are, whenever. Page 342. For a complete picture of the Loyalists, we must inquire into their conduct in all the basic areas of camp life. A. Attitude toward the camp regimen and toward the prisoners' struggle for their rights. Inasmuch as the camp regimen has been established by us, the Soviet government, it must be observed not only willingly, but conscientiously. The spirit of the regimen has to be observed even before this is demanded or requested by the prisoners, by the supervisors. I saw one word and I read something that wasn't there. There are some astonishing observations in the work of that same Ginsberg. The women justify the cropping of their own hair with clippers, since the prison regimen requires it. From a closed prison, they were sent to die in Kolyma, and they had their own explanation already prepared. Quote, "That means they trust us, that we will work there conscientiously," unquote. And what the devil is the point of talking about any kind of struggle? Struggle against whom? Against our own people? Struggle for what? For our personal release? For that you don't need to struggle. You have to ask according to the two rules. A struggle for the overthrow of the Soviet government? Shut your mouth. Among the camp inmates were those who wanted to struggle but could not, those who could but didn't want to, those who both could and wanted to, and did when the time comes. We will tell about them too. The Orthodox Communists represented a fourth group, those who didn't want to and couldn't even if they had wanted to. All their preceding life had prepared them only for an artificially conditioned environment. Their struggle out in freedom had consisted in adopting and transmitting resolutions and instructions already approved by their higher-ups, with the help of the telephone and the electric bell. In camp conditions, where the struggle most frequently was at hand-to-hand, with unarmed prisoners marching against machine pistols, crawling on their bellies under fire. They were the store Polikarpoviches or Diltmidoviches, frightening no one and good for nothing. And even less did these principled warriors for universal human happiness offer any hindrance to the depredations of the thieves, nor did they object to the dominance of the thieves in the kitchens and among the trustees. Just read General Gorbatov. You can find it there. For it was on the basis of their theory that the socially friendly thieves got such vast power in camp. They didn't prevent the thieves from plundering weak sects in their presence, and they themselves did not resist being plundered by them. All this was completely logical. There were no loose ends lying about, and no one disputed it. But then the time came to write our history, and the first half-stifled voices were raised about life in the camps, and the good thinkers looked back and were pained. How could that be? They were so progressive, so conscientious, and they had not struggled. And they had not even known that there was a personality cult of Stalin, and they certainly hadn't supposed that dear Lavrenti Pavlovich Beria was an inveterate enemy of the people, and they had to hasten to spread some kind of muddied version to the effect that they had struggled. and all the snarling dogs on magazines who felt up to it blamed my Ivan Denisovich, the son of a bitch, for not waging a struggle. Moskovskaya Pravda, December 8, 1962, even reproached Ivan Denisovich for not going to the underground meetings arranged by the communists in camp, claiming he was unwilling to learn from the thinking people. What kind of delirium is this? What underground meetings, and why? To show the finger inside their pockets? And whom would they have to show that finger? It from the junior jailer right on up to Stalin himself? One and all, with that same Soviet power? So when and with what methods did they struggle? No one can tell us that. And what were they thinking about then, if all they allowed themselves to do was keep repeating that everything that is real is rational? That is what they were thinking of their entire prayer. That was what were they thinking of if their entire prayer was, "Do not beat me, please, O whip of the Tsar"? B. Relationship to the camp administration. What kind of attitude, other than the most respectful and friendly, could the good thinkers have towards the camp chiefs? After all, the camp chiefs were all party members and were carrying out the party's directives, and it was not their fault that I equals the one and only innocent, had been sentenced and sent there. The Orthodox communists understood quite well that if they themselves had suddenly turned up in the position of the camp chief, they would have done everything just as he did. Todorsky, whom today in our whole press has proclaimed a camp hero, he is a former seminarist who became a journalist, singled out by Lenin, and by the 30s, for some reason, installed as the chief of the Air Force Academy, although he was not a flyer, would even, according to Dyakov's account, talk to the supply chief, whom a slogger would pass without a glance, like this: "How can I serve you, citizen chief?" For the chief of the medical section, Todorsky, composed a synopsis of the short course of party history. If Todorsky ever had any thoughts in the least unlike those in the short course, then where were his principles? How could he compose a synopsis exactly according to Stalin? And if he had really thought precisely like that, then that's what is called, quote, perished comically, unquote. But it is too little to love one's camp bosses. What is required is that the bosses love you. It is necessary to explain to the chiefs that we are all the same stuff as you, and you have to take care of us somehow. And this is why the heroes of Serbyakova, Ch11, Dyakov, Alden Semyonov, on every occasion, whether necessary or not, whether convenient or not, when the prisoner transport is being received, when the names are read out from the list, declare themselves communists. That is their application for a cozy spot. Ch11 even thinks up a scene like this. At the Kotlas transit prison, the roll is being called. "Party member?" asks the chief. "What fools is he writing this for? Where in the prison list is there a column for party membership?" "Members of the Communist Party of Bolsheviks?" replies Ch11 to the faked question. And one has to give the chiefs their due. Dzerzhinsky men or Beria men, they heard, and they arranged things for them. Yes, and were there not perhaps certain written or at least oral directives to make things easier for the communists? For even in periods of the sharpest persecutions of the 58s, when they were being ousted from all jobs as trustees, former big-shot communists for the same reason kept their places. For example, in Krasleg, former member of the Military Council of the North Caucasus, Military District Averbakh remained as a brigadier of the vegetable gardeners, and former General Ivanchik remained as a brigadier for cottages, and former secretary of the Moscow Committee Dudkov also kept a soft spot. But even without any directive, plain solidarity and plain self-interest, you today, me tomorrow, were bound to compel the MBD men to look after the true believers. And the way it turned out was that the chiefs kept the Orthodox communists at their right hand so that they constituted a firmly established privileged stratum in camp. But this did not extend to the quiet rank-and-file communists who did not go to the chiefs to trumpet their faith. Aldan Semyonov writes quite straightforwardly that the communist camp chiefs tried to transfer communist prisoners to lighter work, and Yakov doesn't conceal it either. The newcomer, Rom, announced to the chief of the hospital that he was an old Bolshevik, and right away he was assigned as a medical section clerk, an enviable post. And the camp chief also gave orders that Todorsky was not to be removed from his post as a medical orderly. But the most remarkable case of all is recounted by Ch11 in his Kolyma notes. A new MVD big shot arrived there and recognized the prisoner Zaborsky as his former corps commander from the Civil War. They wept on meeting. Go ahead, ask half my kingdom, and Zaborsky agreed to accept special food from the kitchen and to take as much bread as he needed, unquote. In other words, to eat the bread of the sloggers, since no one was going to prescribe a new ration norm for him, and asked only to be given a 6-volume set of Lenin to read in the evening by the light of the kerosene lamp. That is how everything was arranged. During the day he was fed with stolen rations, in the evening he read Lenin, and that is how openly and with enjoyment vileness is glorified. Celeste writes about some kind of mythical underground Politburo of the work brigade. A bit too big a deal, wasn't it, for a work brigade? Which managed to get a hold of a loaf of bread from the bread-cutting room after hours, as well as a bowl of oatmeal. And what that means is that we have our own trustees everywhere, and also, let's swipe what we can, good thinkers. That very same Celeste gives us his final conclusion. Quote, some survived thanks to their strength of spirit. Those were the Orthodox communists swiping the bread and cereal, AS, while others survived thanks to an extra bowl of oatmeal. That was Ivan Denisovich. Well, so be it. Ivan Denisovich had no friends among the trustees. Just tell us one thing. Who laid the bricks? Who laid the bricks in the wall? Was it you hardheads? C. Attitude toward labor. It appeared that on the whole, the Orthodox communists were devoted to work. Ike's deputy, even in a typhoid delirium, could calm down only when the nurse assured him that yes, telegrams on grain procurements had already been sent. It appears that on the whole they approved of camp labor also. It was necessary to the building of communism, and without it, the issuing of gruel to the whole horde of prisoners would have been undeserved. Therefore, they considered it quite rational that persons refusing to go to work should be beaten and imprisoned in the punishment block and shot in wartime. They considered it quite moral to be a work assigner, a brigadier, any kind of cattle driver or whip cracker, and in this regard they disagreed with the so-called honest thieves and were in agreement with the bitches. Take, for example, the brigadier of the logging brigade, Yelena Nikitina, a former secretary of the Kiev Komsomol Committee. Here is what they say about her. She stole from the output of her own brigade of 58th and traded it with the thieves. Lucia daughter of a Baku commissar, bought her way out of work from Nikitina with chocolate received in a food parcel. On the other hand, this woman brigadier refused to let the anarchist Tatiana Gerasyeva leave the woods for 3 days until she had frostbite. Take Prokhorov Postover, also a Bolshevik, though not a party member, who turns in sex for deliberately failing to fulfill norms, used to report this to the chiefs, and the sex got punished. To the sex reproaches that he must realize it was slave labor, Postover replied, "That's a strange philosophy. In capitalist countries, the workers struggle against slave labor, but here, even if we are slaves, we work for a social state, not for private persons. These officials are only temporarily in power. One blow from the people, and they will disappear, but the people's state will remain." Unquote. It is a jungle, and the consciousness of an orthodox communist, it's impossible to make sense of it, and the only exception the good thinkers make is this reservation for themselves. It would be wrong to use them on general camp work, since it would then be difficult for them to preserve themselves for the future fertile leadership of the Soviet people. Anyways, it would also be difficult for them to think during those years in camp. In other words, to repeat in turn, one after another, while gathered in a circle, that Comrade Stalin, Comrade Molotov, Comrade Beria, and all the rest of the party were right, and therefore, using all their efforts under the protection of the camp chiefs and with each other's secret help, they tried to get themselves places as trustees. In jobs where no knowledge or skills were required, none of them was a specialist. In calm and quiet places farther from the main hand-to-hand camp struggle. And so they grabbed hold, Zakharov, Malenkov's teacher, as a storage room clerk for personal property, the above-mentioned Zaborsky, Ch11 himself, at the clothing issue desk, the notorious Todorsky in the medical section, Konoktin as a medical assistant, though he was not a medical assistant at all. Serebriakova as a nurse, though she was no nurse at all, and Aldan Semyonov was also a trustee. The camp biography of Dyakov, the biggest loudmouth of the Loyalists, had been depicted by his own pen and is truly astonishing. During the 5 years of his sentence, he contrived to leave the camp compound just once, and then for half a day. And during that half day, he worked for a half an hour cutting branches, and then the jailer said to him, "You're fagged out, go take a rest." Half an hour in 5 years, not everyone gets away with that. For a certain length of time, he malingered on the pretext of a rupture, subsequently a fistula resulting from the rupture. But listen here, not for 5 years. To receive such golden jobs as medical statistician, librarian of the cultural and educational section, and storage room clerk for personal possessions, and to stay in such jobs for your entire term, a bribe of fat bacon wasn't enough. Most likely you had to sell your soul to the Godfather as well. Let the old camp veterans be the judge of this. And Dyakov was not merely a trustee, but an aggressive trustee. In the first version of his story, before he was publicly shamed for it, He elegantly explained why an intelligent person ought to avoid the crude lot of the people, a chess tactic, castling, i.e., setting someone else in the forefront of the battle. And this is a person who has now taken it upon himself to become the principal interpreter of camp life. Averbakh reports to us on her own camp biography with careful omissions. There are said to be serious witnesses against her. I did not have the opportunity of checking this. Not only the authors themselves, but all the rest of the Loyalists are also portrayed by this chorus of authors as being outside manual labor, either in the hospital or in trusty jobs where they would carry on their obscurantist, although somewhat updated, conversations. These writers are not telling lies. They simply didn't have enough imagination to show those hardheads engaged in labor and useful to society. How can you portray it if you've never worked yourself? D. Attitude toward escapes. The hardheads themselves never attempted to escape, you see. That would have been an act of struggle against the regime, a dislocation of the MVD, in other words, an act of subversion of Soviet power. Furthermore, every Orthodox communist always had 2 or 3 petitions for pardon traveling around in the highest appeals jurisdictions, and an escape might be interpreted there at the top as lack of patience, even as lack of confidence in the highest jurisdictions. Anyways, the good thinkers didn't need freedom in general. They didn't even need the ordinary common freedom of humans and birds. Every truth is concrete, and the only freedom they needed was freedom given them by the state, lawful freedom, duly signed and sealed, with a return to their pre-arrest situation and privileges. Without that, what use was freedom? Well, and if they themselves didn't try to escape, then all the more did they condemn the escapes of others as pure subversion of the MVD system and of economic construction. And if escapes were so detrimental, then it was probably the civic duty of a loyal communist on learning of an escape attempt to denounce it to the comrade's security chief. Was it not logical? True, there were one-time members of the underground among them, and bold people from the Civil War, but their dogma had transformed them into political riffraff. E. Attitude toward the rest of the 58s. They never mingled with their comrades in distress. This would have been non-party conduct, sometimes in secret among themselves, and sometimes quite openly too, for there was no risk in it for them. They opposed themselves to the dirty 58s and attempted to regain purity by holding themselves apart. It was precisely this simple-hearted mass that they had led out in freedom, where they never allowed it to utter a free word. And now, when they turned out to be in the same cells with them on equal terms, they still weren't at least depressed by it and shouted as much as they pleased, "This is what you deserve, scoundrels. You are all pretending out there in freedom. You are all enemies, and they were right to arrest you. Everything is in order, and everything is progressing toward the great victory," unquote. I am the only one unjustly imprisoned. And the Loyalists seriously ascribed to the strength of the all-conquering teaching the absence of any resistance to the path of their prison monologues, because the administration was always on the side of the Orthodox communists, and the counter-revolutionaries did not even dare raise an objection, since otherwise they would get second terms to the strength of the all-conquering doctrine. It was with frank contempt, with commanding class hatred, that the Orthodox communists gazed around them at all the 58s except themselves. Diakov, I thought with horror, who are we among here? Konikotin didn't want to give an injection to a sick Vlasov man, though as a medical assistant it was his duty, but he self-sacrificingly contributed blood for a sick convoy guard. Just like in their free Dr. Baranov. First of all, I am a Chekist, and then I am a physician. Now that is medicine. Now we understand why honest people are required in the hospital, Diakov, so as to know who to inject and who not. And they transformed this hatred into action, and why should they keep this class hatred to themselves? In Sheldon's account, in Shelest's account, Samuel Gendal, a professor, probably of communist jurisprudence, provided the ammunition when the lack of any desire to go out to work on part of the Caucasian nationalities became apparent. The Muslim mullah must be suspected of sabotage. F. Attitude towards stool pigeons. Just as all roads lead to Rome, so all the preceding points lead us to this one. It was impossible for the hardheads not to cooperate with the best and most sincere of the camp chiefs, the security chief. In their situation, this was the most reliable method of helping the NKVD, the state, and the party. In addition, it was very profitable. It was the best way of getting together with the higher-ups. Services rendered to the Godfather did not go unrewarded. The only means of sticking for years on end in the best trusty soft spots inside the camp compound was with the help of the Godfather. In one of the books about camp from the same Orthodox communist Kratov, who is the author's favorite, 1. Survive at any price, adapting to everything. 2. It is better for decent people to become stool pigeons because it is better than to leave it to scoundrels. But even if some Orthodox communists got stubborn and chose not to work for the Godfather, it was still hard for him to avoid that door. The security chief would certainly not omit to offer an affectionate invitation to all true believers who loudly proclaimed their faith, asking in a fatherly tone, "Are you a Soviet person?" And the loyalist could not answer no, and that meant yes. And if the answer was yes, then come and collaborate, comrade. There is nothing to hinder you. Only now, when distorting the entire history of the camps, are they ashamed to admit their collaboration. Not all of them got caught red-handed, like Liza Kotik, who dropped a written denunciation, but now, somehow, had blurted out that security officer, Sokovitov, used to send off Diakov's letters for him, bypassing the camp censor. And the only thing unsaid is, in exchange for what did he send them? That kind of friendship. Whence did it come? They remembered to report on that security officer, Yakovlev, advised Todorsky not to declare himself a communist openly, but they don't go on and explain why he was concerned about this. But this is only temporary. Already at hand is that glorious time when people will be able to fling restraint to the winds and admit loudly, yes, we were stoolies, and we are proud of it. However, why this whole chapter? Why the whole lengthy survey and analysis of the Loyalists? Instead, we shall just write in letters a yard high, Janos Kadar and Vladislav Gomulka. They both underwent unjust arrest and interrogation with torture, and both of them served time so and so many years, and the whole world sees how much they learned. The whole world has learned.